Hare Krishna. So we are extremely fortunate here today to be with Srimati Shefali Vaidya ji here in the wonderful place of IIT Mandi, Indian Institute of Technology, here in the foothills of the Himalayas in Himachal Pradesh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Shefali Vaidya ji is actually a very profound author and linguist, and also a public intellectual who has really dedicated herself. She is convener of the Indic Academy and dedicating herself to bringing back some various beautiful, wonderful aspects of Indian culture back into the society, which unfortunately, have been struggling to keep pace with the modern world. So we are truly, it's our great pleasure and privilege to have you here today. Would you like to share a little more about what you are working towards? What's your passion?
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me here to talk about. I think we are all co-travelers on the same path, trying to make sense of how great this country once was and how it was willfully destroyed in almost every aspect. Talking about myself, I grew up in a small village in Goa. And when I was growing up, my village was the first place actually who fought against the Portuguese in armed resistance in 1583, long before the first war of independence, long before the French Revolution even. And that was the history I kind of grew up listening to. So, and my family personally was involved in Goa liberation movement. So that culture of nationalism and dharma was always there from home. And I think as I grew up, I realized that we are by nature a very beauty loving society. We have a very keen sense of aesthetics, and dharma is never devoid of beauty. So everything we do, the way we eat, the way you distribute food on a banana leaf, there is, if you have noticed, like in South India, they still do it even, they have this banana leaf meal, and the way the meal is served, there is, if you look at it, it's a visual treat. It's not just a treat for your taste buds, but the way where the rice is to be kept, where pickle is to be kept, where dal is to be kept. There's a lot of attention given to the color scheme. So when you look at it, it's very beautiful. And that's not just in food, in our clothing, in our ornaments, in our history, in our puja. When we do Shodashopachar puja of any deity that we worship, there is a sequence there, and the sequence is very beautiful. You first invoke the deity, you invite the deity, then you offer the deity asana, then you give the deity a bath, then you change his clothes, then you give abhushana. So there is this beautiful sequence of things which is very visually appealing, and I think since childhood I was always attracted to visual stimuli, and I was a lifelong follower of visual aesthetics. So that fueled my interest in temples, temple architecture, temples history, and textiles, and also the study of motifs, which is really my core area of research. See, when you look at Indian art and when you look at the basic thought behind Indian art, is that Indian art essentially encompasses everything. So there is this beautiful story in Vishnu Dharmottara Purana where a king goes to Rishi Markandeya and he says, I want to make murtis, so teach me Pratima Lakshana. I want to carve sculptures. So Rishi Markandeya says, yes, but to understand Pratima Lakshana, you must first understand the basics of painting. So the king says, okay, teach me the basics of painting. So, but Rishi Markandeya says, but to understand the basics of painting, you must first understand music. So then he says, okay, teach me music. He says, but to understand first the rhythmic music, you have to understand poetry. So, and it is not any craft or any art in Bharat, it's never in isolation. It is always built upon your knowledge of holistically connected, and it's always built upon the knowledge of something else. So that I found very profound, and I see that all the time in whatever studies I do. For example, if you look at motif study, which is my main area of research, if you look at the peacock motif, we see peacocks in almost every part. What do you mean by motif, by the way? Motifs is like the basic unit of design. Like for example, the cloth that I'm wearing, the basic motif here is the square. So आपके कपड़े में जो white जो squarish design है, that is the basic motif. You keep repeating it and then you form a pattern, and that pattern is the design. So when you study motif, that's the basic unit of design. There are some motifs which constantly recur in all forms of Indian art, Indian literature, Indian performing arts, Indian crafts, and it's the same thing. For example, peacock. Now peacock we know is India's national bird. It is found in almost all parts of Bharat. But do you know that the peacock has been with us as a motif from the Sindhu Saraswati civilization days? So there has been pottery which has been found, which goes back to 2500 BCE or probably even before that. So at least 7,000, yes, 7,500 to 10,000 years.
Yes.
And there is pottery on which the peacock has been depicted. And you can see the peacock in Sri Krishna's Konde. You see the peacock in jewelry. You see the peacock in the textiles all over India. So you will see a peacock in a Banarsi sari also. You will see a peacock in a Kanchipuram also. On Paithani also. You will see the peacock in our classical music all the time. You will see peacock in our paintings like in the Ragmala paintings or in the Pattachitras, all the traditional arts. You will see the peacock in temple architecture everywhere, from Odisha to Tamil Nadu to Rajasthan, everywhere. Similarly is the case with lotus. There is parrot, there is elephant, there is lion, there is the kalpavriksha, that is a tree of life, there is a peacock feather, there is the maina, there is the jasmine flower. All of these motifs, they constantly recur across art forms. And it's fascinating to me that a culture, a civilization, which had these markers in almost every form of art.
There means a lot of communication, there was commonality across India, across different aspects of the culture.
And the commonality is always there. Forget about motifs, okay? 2-3 years ago, I was traveling through Pitru Paksha. I travelled across 5 different states of India. It just so happened I travel a lot to give talks. So I travelled in Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Assam and Madhya Pradesh. 5 days in 5 states in 15 days. And everywhere I went, these are places which speak a different language. They eat different kind of food. They look their geography is very different, right? Tamil Nadu looks very different from Assam.
Absolutely.
But having said that, everywhere there were people giving tarpana to their ancestors during Pitru Paksha. In the same way.
In the same way?
Yes, they were standing in the river.
Yes.
They were giving tarpana. They were doing pindadan across from Assam to Tamil Nadu. And this has been continuing for thousands of years uninterrupted, even though there have been so many political breaks, there have been so many invasions, there have been so many attempts at destruction. But even that, people have held on to their dharma and they have held on to these cultural practices. Now imagine, Yuan Sang, sorry, I'm going all over the place, but the vastness of our culture is like that. So when Yuan Sang visited Bharat, he talks about, he went to Prayag and he was very close to King Harshvardhana. So he has said that in Prayag, during Kumbh, there is a mela and the king himself does a bath there, ritual bath there, and after the bath, he distributes all his wealth to the people who have assembled there. And he says that for this festival, for this mela, people come from all over Bharat. They speak different languages, and he's talking about this in the 7th century CE, okay, not now. So he's talking about people coming from all over India. They are talking, they are having Shastrartha. They are,
so there was this commonality, there was this discussion that was happening.
And he says it's not just the Vedic Darshana also. He says the Jains also come, the Buddhists also come, the Vedic people also come, and they have this exchange of thoughts, which is kind of what we saw this year, right? In Mahakumbh, everybody came. But this is again a cultural tradition that's been with us for more than 1300 years, recorded. उससे पहले भी हुआ करता था, but ये हमको recording, हम किसी ने लिखा हुआ वो अगर हम ढूंढे तो हमको ये मिल जाता है. और उसकी डिस्क्रिप्शन में और आज जो हो रहा है उसके डिस्क्रिप्शन में ज़्यादा फर्क नहीं है. And that is what I find amazing, because 1300 years ago,
which has continued. इससे पहले, इससे ऐसी संस्कृति पहले आई नहीं.
But imagine the sheer achievement कि 1300 years ago जब planes नहीं थे, जब buses नहीं थे, जब सड़कें नहीं थी, जब WhatsApp नहीं थे, जब messages नहीं थे, जब internet नहीं था, तब कैसे तमिलनाडु के एक villagers को पता हुआ होगा कि अब कुंभ सिंहस्थ है, अब मुझे प्रयाग के लिए जाना चाहिए. जाते तो थे. how was this culture spread? How was the civilization spread? And ultimately, you know, I don't like the word unity in diversity. It's wrong. It is basically unity of diversity. We just have diverse way of expressing the same truth across this country. And once you start studying it, it's really fascinating, and you know, your eyes really like pop up.
Amazing.
Because every day it's a new discovery. It's a wonderful
We
journey.
can see that in how you're even expressing it. Would you like to share, I know your areas of design you also have temple design, you have like any specific examples you want to share, which is like I heard you talking about the Ram Leela, you know, the
Yeah.
Ram deities and how they were
Yeah.
constructed like that. Anything specifically about how this entire art of, you know, architecture.
See, if
yeah.
you look at a traditional temple anywhere in Bharat, the styles may be different. In the north, you have the Nagar style. In the south, you have the Dravida style. In central India, you have something called a Vesara style, which is like a combination of the Nagara style and Dravida style temples. In Himalayas, in Himachal Pradesh, you will have this conical pagoda-shaped temples.
Yes.
So there have been regional variations because of the climate, because of other things. Here, wood is readily available, so the temples will have very rich wood carving. And because this place snows quite a bit, so you have to have very sharp conical shikharas so that the snow will fall off. Because otherwise, if the snow accumulates on the shikhara, then the shikhara will break under the weight. That is why you have this sharp conical shikharas that you have here. So every place will have the regional variation. It will also make use of construction materials which is readily available there.
Yes.
So Kerala also has a lot of wood, so Kerala temples have a lot of wood. Tamil Nadu has a lot of stone, so Tamil Nadu temples are made of granite. If you go to Hoysala temples in Karnataka, there is that chloride schist readily available there. So all their temples are made of chloride schist. If you go to Odisha, sandstone is readily available there. So their temples
Yeah,
are
so
made of that
it was always in harmony with
sandstone.
nature.
It was
So that
always
it's connected
and
with the local-
easily available.
Yes.
And because of that, the stone also has its properties, right? So our sculptors were not only masters artisans, their concept of beauty was sublime. That is not even what I'm talking about. But they were also such expert geologists, and they had so much of control over the basic properties of the stone to know that this is the pressure I must exude on the stone to be able to take something out of it.
Wow.
For example, if you go to the Hoysala temples in Karnataka, which are made out of chloride schist, which is a very soft stone when you mine it, that's why it's called soap stone. It is so soft that it's like a soap. So you can actually use a needle like very fine instrument and carve it. So that is why if you see the Hoysala sculptures, you will see that they are profuse. Not even 1 inch is left uncarved. And the bangles there, like there is a murti which is holding a hand like this, you can actually move the bangle separately, and it's made out of the same stone. Imagine the level of control and the artistry the Shilpakar must have had to create something like that. If you go to Tamil Nadu, the temples are built out of hard granite. So you cannot have this kind of fineness. But they have fineness in the expressions. They have few jewelry. They wouldn't have, like in Hoysala temples, the Apsaras will have bangles from here to here. In the Tamil Nadu temples, you will have maybe just 2 bangles or whatever, because the granite is much harder to carve. But having said that, the kind of sublime expressions and beauty that you will find in the Chola temple sculptures is rarely to be found anywhere. So it's really fascinating. And if you study more, and I talk to a lot of sthapatis, traditional sculptors who are continuing the art even today. There are schools of sculpture in Odisha, there are schools of sculptures in Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, different places. And their idiom is slightly different from each other, but they will all tell you the same thing, that to be a sthapati, you have to study the Vedas, not just understand it. You have to study Sanskrit, you have to study the Vedas, you have to study the Vedangas, you have to study Jyotish, you have to study traditional metallurgy, you have to study traditional geology, the properties of the stone. And not only that, when you are actually making the murti, you have a certain modes to follow. You have to prepare yourself, because you are invoking the divine in that stone, right? It's just a stone. So to be able to do that, you have to elevate your consciousness, your energy. And for that, there are very specific
So
rituals.
first of all, they have to understand so many different fields of knowledge that you are saying. It's not just the sculpture.
No, it's not.
But can you repeat that quickly? What are the few things that you said about what are the different things they have to know?
They have to know the Vedas. They have to
know
study
Vedas.
Sanskrit, of course.
Yes.
They have to know the Vedangas.
Wow.
They have to know mineralogy. They have to know geology, and they have to know the stories from Puranas as well.
Wow.
Because
These are the people who
most
are
of the
sculpting it,
time
the sculptures. Yes.
they are carving scenes from the Purana, right?
Wow.
Or Purana or the Agamas or whatever. So for a Shiva temple, you would want to carve a scene of Shiva killing Andakasur,
Yes.
or Lord Shiva killing Gajasur.
Yeah.
So you
Wow.
have to know the story as well to be able to put it. If I don't know the story about Mahabharat, how can I write a commentary on it? You have to know that, right? Not only that, you have to do tremendous sadhana before you
Sadhana to do this,
actually
yes.
carve the murti.
Yes.
So, if you talk to any sculptor today, even Arun Yogiraj ji, who did the Ramlalla murti
Yeah, let's
in
talk
Ayodhya.
about him.
Yeah.
The person who did the
Ramlalla
for
in
Ramlalla
Ayodhya.
in Ayodhya.
Yes.
Yes.
So I spoke to him about this and how was his experience. He said that before carving the murti, there was a set of things that he had to follow, set of rituals, like no non-vegetarian food, no fasting for a few days, meditation, 2 or 3 hours of meditation every day. And
Wow, 2
most
to 3 hours of
traditional
meditation
sculptors,
every day.
yes, once they decide that this is the deity I'm going to create, and they know the stone that they're going to create it into, the block of stone, the Shila, so to speak, they stare at the Shila for a unspecified period of time till the vision, the murti appears in front of their mind's eye. So he could see Ram Lalla the way Ram Lalla was going to look finally into the
Amazing.
Shila in front of his mind's eye. That is when he thinks he is ready to put hammer and chisel on the stone.
Wow.
So I asked him, it's an unending process, right? If you carve a murti, you can go on carving, you can go on carving. Fineness has no end,
Yes,
perfection has no end. So I asked him, when do you stop?
Yeah.
When do you know the murti is complete? What is
Okay.
that point?
Wonderful.
So he said, you just know. Like one day, he was giving me the example of the Shankaracharya Murti that he did in Amarnath. So he said, I was carving. And then one day, I got this feeling that the Bhagavad Pada himself was telling me that it's done. So that is the point you basically
Amazing.
decide that it's done.
Amazing.
It cannot be done without divine grace.
Yes.
It's not your regular commercial,
That is the beautiful.
carving.
That's
Yes.
the beautiful thing that your skills are basically embedded with the aspect of your own sadhana and your
Yes.
own character
Yes.
to all of this. So it's very, this is all was there in India.
Yes.
But you have, how is it that all of this got destroyed?
all
really?
of
What
this
would
got
you say about
destroyed. The process of destruction
that? Or
actually.
is not at least known to the people in general.
No. There was a systematic attempt made to destroy all this. The first wave of destruction happened with the Islamic invasions, where they destroyed our temples. Today, if you see across North India, you will rarely find a temple that is intact. Every temple will have had some signs of destruction. There will be some murti, the nose will be broken. There will be some place where there will be attacks. But there is never a single temple. In Delhi, I was shocked when I read that. In Delhi, there is not a complete temple left that is more than 300 years old. Every single temple that was in that region has been destroyed. Wrap your head around that. And we just don't know it.
Right.
And this is something that in South, fortunately, the Islamic invasions were repulsed successively. That is why even there is destruction, but the destruction is not bad as it was in North India. But the kind of cultural treasures, the kind of civilizational treasures that we have lost is really awful. It really hurts me when our textbook say that Taj Mahal is the largest marvel of engineering in India.
Yeah.
Go to Tanjavur,
Yes.
see the Brihadishwara temple, go to Ellora, see the Kailasha cave which is carved top down, 3
Right.
stories, a
Yeah.
full temple, and then go look at Taj Mahal. It looks like a glorified warehouse. I mean,
Yes.
pardon me for being politically incorrect, but that is what it is. It's a very, very mediocre piece of workmanship and engineering compared to the temples that we had. So, talking about the destruction started with the Islamic rule, but that was Islamic rule basically destroyed a lot of things like the temples, like the cultural ways. People could not openly practice their religion, particularly in North India. But the British did something even worse. They destroyed mines.
Ah.
So
Right.
they made generations of Indians completely divorced from Dharma, and they made this artificial dichotomy that Dharma is something that you practice only inside the four
this
walls
was not
of
the
your
case,
house.
was-
This
yeah.
was not the case. Ours was a dharmic civilization.
Yeah, it was
Dharma
part of
everywhere.
everything that you do outside. Yes. Yes.
So there was a systematic attack. Goa, the state where I come from, the Portuguese ruled Goa for 452 years. Not many people know it. They were the first European colonizers to come in India, and they were the last European colonizers to leave in 1961. And in 2 years, just in 2 years, this is documented data because I do a lot of talks on it. In just 2 years, they destroyed close to 900 Hindu temples in a small state like Goa. Of course, the Hindus of Goa tried to save the murtis and they shifted them to safe places and they built the temples there, which is where you can see the temples in Goa even today. But very, very few people know about this history, this dark period of history.
Yes.
So there was a systematic attack to destroy everything, not just the temples, not just the way of worship either. For example, the British systematically destroyed textiles, which is the second area I work in. The British systematically destroyed India's textile industry, like with a plan. Because that was the time they had come up with mechanized cloth in Manchester. So they wanted a cheap market to dump those textiles. So what they did was they basically destroyed the weavers. For the Jamdani
For their
weavers, they cut off,
industry to happen,
they
the
cut off
traditional
their
thing was
thumbs.
specifically
Yes,
destroyed.
yes. And what they did was they forced the farmers of India to sell cotton and other raw materials to the mills of Manchester at a cheap price. So destroyed farming as a business.
Wow.
And then the weavers, who would the weavers sell it to? Most of the people in the country were farmers, right? And the weavers, and because and they copied designs from India. I forgot to tell you that. So there were, during British rule, in the initial days of the British rules, so there were British guys who would come to India, they would collect samples from the weavers and they would cut those samples and they would, for example, they would cut this part and take only this pattern and they would take it to England where their technicians would study it and they would replicate it in the machines,
Yeah.
and they would sell something that looked similar but obviously was not of the same quality
yes.
in India
Yeah.
at 1/100th the price.
Oh my God.
So the weaver, even if he weaves, a weaver takes 4 days even today to make a sari.
Yeah.
A machine can make 400 saris in a day.
Yes.
Even though the raw material cost stays the same, the labor cost is vastly different, no, for the machine.
Yes.
So the machine could afford to sell those mechanized saris, the powerloom saris, could afford to be sold at a much cheaper rate.
Yes.
And obviously the economy was getting destroyed, the farmers were getting squeezed,
Yes.
the traders were getting squeezed, the royalty was getting destroyed completely. So who are the people who are patronizing the weavers?
Wow.
So this was a double attack. For the weavers, the cost of production was very high, the cost of the goods was very high, and the people who were buying those goods were no longer there.
Yeah.
So, in fact, it was Bentinck, who was the Viceroy of England. He made a statement, not me, I'm quoting him. He says that the bones of Indian weavers are bleaching in the plains of India. They were in that dire states.
Wow. Yeah, see, you see such a, so you know, this is amazing to see. Either you're talking about the temple architecture or you're talking about the textile industry and all of that. Systematically, you know, in a way deliberately over the last 1,000 years or so,
Yes.
all of this was, you know, deliberately dismantled. And that is why the entire culture around that is getting lost. And I know we are working towards that thing. And here we are, here in IIT Mandi, as you can see, in an academic
Yes.
place, and we are starting our Bhaktivedanta University very soon, where the entire idea is to bring all of these different
Yes.
aspects of our culture, you know, all these different aspects, everything, as you're saying, textile or this, or architecture, or it can be even music, dance, drama, it can be
Yes.
so many different areas. We're trying to bring all.
Sustainability practices.
Yeah,
See,
sustainability practices, so many other things.
Yeah, we were a nature worshipping society.
Yeah.
So everything from soil conservation to water conservation,
Everything.
conserving biodiversity was very natural to
It was
us.
natural, it was part of our whole thing. So we are
Yes.
trying that we can do our best to bring this back. How do you think our academia or the Bhaktivedanta University can play a role in the things that you are talking in
See,
order to in order to truly bring this back to the mainstream?
See, first of all, it's a great idea to have a university, a formal university, dedicated totally to Indian knowledge system. That's a wonderful, wonderful endeavor.
Yes.
And Indian knowledge system is such a vast field and which still has practitioners. So I think it's a great idea. And the way, one way to carry this forward is, yes, you have formally trained academicians definitely to form the curriculum, to do the formal teaching, whatever. But more than that, what IKS needs today is to get the real practitioners into the academic fold and get them as adjunct professors.
Right.
Because
Get
you
the
have
real
your,
guys.
yes,
Yeah,
the
guys
real
are
guys.
absolutely
So
experts.
somebody is teaching textile design. So maybe I can design the curriculum, but you need a weaver to come with the loom there to actually
to try to work towards that.
Work towards
Yes,
that.
that's the
And
idea.
if you do that, if you actually make the practitioners and the academicians meet in a kind of a holistic environment, I think it will be an absolutely
And I think that's where a
unique
partnership between
experiment.
somebody like your good self and
I
Bhakti
would
Aditya
love
comes
that.
into play.
Yes,
Because
I would
you
love
are
that.
working, with right there on the ground with those people, whether they are the artisans or whether they are the text, the weavers,
Yes.
etc. You bring them into here, right here, into the academic
Yes.
world of the university, and they collaborate with people who
Yes.
have the teaching expertise and all that. So then, people are getting that. I was
Yes.
talking to Dr. Lakshmidhar Behra, who is the director of IIT Mandi, and others, and they were saying that how, and even Dr. G.S. Murthy, who is the coordinator for
Yes.
IKS, he was saying we need to have more and more practical work
Yes,
happening right
yes.
here in the
Yes.
university
Yes.
and all of that. So that's how the synergy of whole thing happens.
Yes.
Things are not siloed. That's
Yes,
the,
yes,
you
absolutely.
what is there in your home actually becomes part of your university,
Yes.
and that becomes part of your your profession is also right there. So all of that comes
Yes,
together.
yes.
Then we can truly have that place where people will you can see that culture coming right
Yes.
into the
It has to
academia.
be an immersive, lived experience kind of university, not just academic thing. I mean, academic
Yes.
तो भारत में सब लोग वही
Yes.
कर रहे हैं
हाँ.
जो कभी किसी ने कोई वीवर देखा ही नहीं है, किसी ने कोई वीविंग
बस
क्लस्टर
यही हम
देखा
लोग
ही
करना
नहीं
चाहेंगे।
है, वो जाके पेपर
हाँ.
पढ़ रहा है किसी कॉन्फ्रेंस में. That is not what you should be looking at. What you should be looking at is a immersive, holistic learning environment. I think if you can crack that, it will be an absolutely unique thing, and in the future people will look at this as an example of how holistic university education should be structured.
Yes, so amazing. So this is essentially a beautiful thing that we conclude towards this thing. Said,
Yeah.
we know that this was there. It was part of the entire life, of the entire culture. As we say, India was extremely prosperous. The Samriddhi, it was the Sone ki Chidiya in all kinds of fields. India was extremely prosperous, but that was based on the culture of India. So
Yes.
that Samriddhi was based on the Sanskriti,
Yes.
because it was part of every single aspect of the life of people, not just within their academic institute or their schools. It was in the home, it was in their professions, it was right there in the society, in everything, in their schools of education. So that was the Sanskriti, but this Sanskriti was based on the Saraswati. So
Yes.
this knowledge base, if we can bring back in a practical way, so that all of these things can be taught in a practical, and how beautiful it is. More and more, I
Yes.
think people are want to connect with the tradition, want to connect with the nature, want to connect with each other. In
Yes.
fact,
And I'll tell you something, it's the way for the world is the Bharati way. It's not
Yes.
just for us.
Yes, absolutely.
We have
we
the
are not talking
answers.
absolutely.
Yes.
We are trying to help. We are trying to serve. Basically, we are
Yes.
trying to serve all of humanity, and for that matter, all of the world.
Yes.
Across all species. And so I really hope and pray that we can take up these fields and partner with you
Thank you. I would
these
very
things,
much
whether
like
it is the
yes.
textile industry, or whether it is the architecture, and so many of these wonderful aspects to come together. Bring these beautiful people into the academia and all that. Let them become teachers. Let the teachers go there. Let the students go there, and all of that. And make it again truly a beautiful place.
Thank
In
you.
terms of the wonderful designs, etc. That were to be offered by this wonderful body of knowledge, the Indian knowledge systems. I'm extremely grateful to you. and really looking forward that more and more of this we can work together as part of the Bhaktivedanta University and Bhaktivedanta Research Center. And we also invite you to keep coming here again and again.
Definitely. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope to be associated because, as I said, we are all co-travelers on the same path.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Namaste.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.